Our daughter is a thief and we have proof. That's what my father said while standing at the head of the Thanksgiving table in front of nearly 30 relatives, holding a white envelope like it was a judgment he had been preparing for weeks. He slowly slid it across the table toward me. It was a court summons. Every single person in that dining room was staring at my face. My mother was already crying, which had always been her favorite weapon, ready and loaded whenever she needed it. I looked down at the envelope, then I looked up at my father, and I smiled. Because 4 months earlier, I had hired someone whose entire job was tracking where money disappears. And what they discovered didn't just prove that I was innocent. It shattered a lie my parents had been building carefully since the day my grandfather died. Before I continue, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with this story. You can also drop your location and local time in the comments. My name is Oilia. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a registered nurse in a small town in Georgia. Let me take you back about 8 months, to the week my grandfather Earl Palmer was buried. My grandfather died on a Tuesday in March. He was 84 years old. The doctors said it was pneumonia. They said it happened quickly near the end. I drove 3 hours from my apartment to the funeral home in Dawson, Georgia. The town has a population of around 4,000 people. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your maiden name, your family history, and probably your credit score, too. I grew up there. My grandfather helped raise me for a big part of my childhood. He taught me how to read while we sat together on the porch of his house. He took me fishing every summer at Lake Blackshear until I turned 15 and decided I was suddenly too cool to go fishing with my grandpa anymore. When I was accepted into nursing school, he mailed me a small card with a $50 check inside. On the memo line, he wrote, "Proud of you, Afai." That was his nickname for me when I was little. But during the last 3 years of his life, something changed. I barely heard from him. I would call him, but he rarely answered. I sent letters, birthday cards, pictures from my job at the hospital, and every December I mailed him a Christmas card. Nothing ever came back. No replies. But the mail was never returned either. Just silence. I told myself he was getting older. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he was angry about something I had done and simply forgot to tell me. I didn't know. At the funeral, my father Gerald stood at the front of the chapel and delivered a speech that honestly could have won an award. His eyes filled with tears at exactly the right moments. His voice cracked perfectly when he talked about his childhood. "My father was the greatest man I ever knew," he said while gripping the podium tightly. I was sitting in the third row. No one had asked me to sit closer to the front with the family. After the service ended, Gerald gathered several of us in the church hallway. It was me, my brother Nolan, and a few cousins. He adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. "Dad left everything to me," he said calmly. "The house, the savings, all of it. That was his final wish. Nobody questioned him." Honestly, at first, I almost didn't question him either. But something about the way he said it felt wrong. It sounded too smooth, too prepared. The feeling settled in my chest like when you look at a patient's chart and one number doesn't match the rest. Let me go back about 10 years for a moment. I was 22 years old. I had just finished nursing school and started my first job at the county hospital. I was working 12-hour shifts, and my student loans were already starting to show up in the mail. I was sharing a small 2-bedroom apartment with another nurse, and most nights I was eating frozen burritos because they were cheap. One Sunday evening, my father called me and asked if I could come to the house because he needed to talk. When I arrived, he was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. My mother, Denise, sat next to him. Her eyes were already red, like she had been crying for a while. "We need your help, sweetheart," Gerald said gently. "Just your signature. The bank needs a co-signer for the mortgage. It's temporary. 6 months, maybe less. Then I refinance and your name comes off." My mother wiped her eyes with a tissue. "We could lose the house, Oelia," she said quietly. So I signed the papers. 6 months turned into a year. A year turned into 5. 5 years eventually became 10. Every time I brought it up, the conversation followed the exact same pattern. "Dad, "When are you going to refinance?" "My credit isn't good enough yet," he would answer. "You want us out on the street." And right on schedule, my mother would start crying again. Every single time. Here is what that one signature ended up costing me. I couldn't qualify for my own mortgage. I couldn't get approved for a car loan without terrible interest rates. My credit score kept bouncing between 580 and 620 because Gerald was late on the payments. Sometimes the payment was 30 days late, sometimes 60 days late, and he never told me about it. I only found out because of a credit monitoring alert that woke me up at 2 in the morning one night. Two 60-day late payments that I had never heard about. My credit score had dropped 40 points overnight. I called him the next morning. "Things were tight," he said. "I handled it." But the truth was, he handled it with my name attached to the loan. 2 weeks after the funeral, I sat Gerald down at the kitchen table and spoke as calmly as I could. "Dad, I need my name off that mortgage this year." No yelling, no anger, just a clear statement. Gerald leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "Now is not the time for this, Oilia. I just buried my father." "I know," I said, "and I'm sorry. But this has been 10 years. His jaw tightened. "You expect me to refinance right now? With what credit? Do you think banks are lining up to help a 61-year-old retired insurance agent?" "Then sell the house," I replied. "Downsize. I don't care how it happens. I just need to be off that loan." He stood up so quickly that his chair scraped loudly across the floor. "You want to talk about lawyers?" he snapped. "You want to sue your own parents? Go ahead. Let's see how that looks." I had never mentioned lawyers. He added that part himself. That night, my mother made 8 phone calls. I know because within 3 days, 4 different relatives contacted me. My Aunt Marlene sent a message saying, "Your parents raised you, and this is how you treat them? Shame on you." My cousin Megan left a voicemail asking why I was threatening to take my parents' house away. My father's cousin Danny called and told me that family doesn't do things like this to each other. Every single one of them had the same story, the same version that Gerald and Denise had told them. Oilia is ungrateful. Oilia wants to steal the house. Oilia wants to steal the house. Oilia is turning against her parents right after they lost Earl. Not one of them called to hear my side. Then Gerald called me one more time. His voice sounded flat and cold. "You think you're the only one who can play games?" he said. "Your grandfather left everything to me, and if you keep pushing, everyone will find out what you really did with his money." I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't taken a single dollar, but he was already building the story. I sat in my car outside the hospital after a 12-hour night shift and started doing math on the back of a pharmacy receipt. If Gerald stopped paying the mortgage completely, which he had threatened during arguments before, the bank would go after both of us. That meant foreclosure. My credit wouldn't just drop. It would collapse below 500 and stay there for years. Some hospitals run credit checks on employees. Not all of them, but some do. Mine was one of them. A foreclosure on my record could trigger a review. I could even lose my job. If I tried to protect my credit by taking over the payments myself, it would cost about $1,800 a month. On a nurse's salary in rural Georgia, that was impossible. I was already paying rent, student loans, car insurance, groceries, and everything else. There was no extra space in my budget. And if I pushed back publicly, Gerald had already poisoned the well. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin believed his version of events. In their minds, I was this: selfish daughter trying to steal her parents' home. Fighting back meant fighting completely alone. Then I logged into the mortgage account online. I still had access from years earlier when Gerald asked me to watch the account sometimes. That's when I noticed something strange. A new entry appeared in the account history: a home equity withdrawal. $40,000. It had been taken out 3 months before my grandfather Earl died. Gerald hadn't just kept my name on the mortgage. He had used my co-signature to borrow more money against the house without telling me and without asking for my permission. $40,000 that I had never seen, never approved, and never agreed to. But legally, it was tied to my name. I sat in the empty parking lot for a long time, staring at that screen. He hadn't just trapped me in the mortgage. He had gone back to the trap and made it deeper. The rumors about me didn't begin with a big dramatic accusation. They started slowly with whispers. Gerald and Denise began telling family members, very casually, like it was common knowledge, that I had taken money from my grandfather's house shortly before he died. She went over there alone a few times near the end. Gerald told people, afterward we found the dresser drawer empty, thousands of dollars were gone. There was no evidence, but they didn't need proof. In a small town like Dawson, a father's word carries a lot of weight. My cousin Travis called me one evening. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "Uncle Gerald mentioned that you took some money from Grandpa's dresser, a few $1,000s. What's going on?" "That never happened," I told him. "Okay," he replied. "I'm just telling you what he said." That was how it kept happening. Nobody directly accused me. They just repeated what they had heard. And every time I denied it, I sounded more defensive, which somehow made me seem more guilty. The following Sunday at church, First Baptist, where my family had attended for more than 30 years, a woman named Mrs. Setch gently looked straight at me across the fellowship hall. Then she turned around and walked to the other side of the room without saying a word. She didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. At work, one of the nurses on my unit pulled me aside quietly. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked. "I heard something from my neighbor about your family and some legal problems." Now the rumors were reaching into my professional life. That was the moment everything finally made sense. Gerald wasn't just protecting himself. He was carefully creating a story. If anyone ever questioned the inheritance or the money, he wanted the entire town ready to believe one simple thing: Oily as the thief. But he slipped. He mentioned the dresser drawer specific. Way too specific. How did he know Grandpa kept cash in a dresser drawer, unless he had been inside that drawer himself? I drove 45 minutes to the county courthouse on my day off. I parked in the back lot and walked inside still wearing my scrubs, because I had come straight from a shift and hadn't even gone home to change. The clerk at the probate office was a woman named Diane. She had reading glasses hanging on a beaded chain around her neck. "I need a copy of the probate file for Earl James Palmer," I told her. "He passed away in March this year." "Relation?" she asked. "Granddaughter." She nodded without hesitation. "Probate records are public. Anyone can request them." She printed the documents and handed them to me inside a thick manila folder. I sat on a wooden bench in the courthouse hallway and opened it. The will was there. The one Gerald had filed. It was typed, notarized, and dated 14 months before Grandpa died. The document said clearly, "I leave all real and personal property to my son, Gerald Ray Palmer, everything. The house, the savings accounts, every single asset." I read the page twice, slowly. Then my eyes moved to the signature at the bottom. Earl James Palmer. I had seen my grandfather's handwriting hundreds of times over the years, on birthday cards, on the memo line of every Christmas check he sent me, on little notes he sometimes wrote when I was young. Once when I was 9, he slipped a note into my lunchbox that said, "You're smarter than you think, oi." His handwriting was shaky in his later years, but it had a style that was easy to recognize. The letter E always leaned slightly to the left. The letter P had a long, sweeping tail at the end. It was as familiar to me as my own handwriting. The signature on that will looked close, but it wasn't his. The E stood too straight. The P was shorter than it should have been. The entire signature looked stiff and careful, like someone concentrating very hard to copy something they had only seen a few times. I took a picture of it with my phone. My hands were steady. I wasn't sad anymore. I was certain. I opened my browser and typed a simple search. Forensic accountant near me. The call from my father came on a Wednesday night. I was standing in my kitchen eating leftover soup from the night before when Gerald's name appeared on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer. "Thanksgiving at Marlene's," he said immediately. "No hello." "You're coming." "I'll think about it," I replied. "No," he said firmly. "You will be there. And you'll apologize?" I set my spoon down on the counter. "Apologize for what? For what you stole? In front of everyone?" I didn't steal anything, Dad. Then you won't mind proving it. There was a short pause. See you Thursday. He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there, in my kitchen, for a long time holding the phone against my leg. The soup went cold. I never touched it again. Gerald wasn't inviting me to Thanksgiving dinner. He was preparing a courtroom. 20 minutes later, my mother sent a text message. It was long. 4 full paragraphs filled with the usual words she liked to use. Healing. Closure. Family unity. The last line said, "Your father just wants to resolve this privately. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be. Privately, in front of 30 people." Later, I learned Gerald had called 10 additional relatives who normally skipped Thanksgiving. Second cousins, a great aunt from Macon. Even Denise's old college roommate. He wanted the house full. He wanted an audience, not witnesses to the truth, witnesses to the performance. That night I lay on my couch, staring at the ceiling. I had a choice. I could skip Thanksgiving, stay home, and let Gerald tell whatever story he wanted to people who already believed him, or I could walk into that room and face whatever trap he had prepared. I thought about my grandfather, about the 3 years of silence between us. It wasn't silence, it was sabotage. I picked up my phone and texted Gerald back one word: coming. The next day, Denise called my brother Nolan. I know because Nolan called me about an hour later. His voice sounded tense, like someone standing on a bridge trying to decide which direction to jump. "What's going on, Oelia?" he asked. "Mom says you took money from Grandpa. Did you ever see me take anything, Nolan?" I asked calmly. There was a short pause. "No." "Did I ever mention Grandpa's money to you? Ever?" "No," he admitted. "But Mom is really upset." "Mom is upset because I asked Dad to refinance the mortgage," I said. "That's all this is." He went quiet. Nolan was 28, an electrician, and he lived about 12 minutes away from our parents. He had watched me carry that mortgage responsibility for 10 years without complaining. He knew exactly what it had cost me. He just never spoke up about it. In our family, you didn't question Gerald. You absorbed the pressure and moved on. "They want me to stand with them at Thanksgiving," Nolan finally said. "Mom said the family needs to be united." "United against who?" I asked. "Me?" He didn't answer that. "I'm not asking you to choose a side," I told him. "Just keep your eyes open. Just keep your eyes open." Another long silence passed. "I'll be there," he said quietly, "but I'm not giving any speeches." "That's enough," I told him. We hung up, but something stayed in my mind. The pause before he answered my question about whether he had seen me take anything. It wasn't the pause of someone unsure. It was the pause of someone who wanted to say something else, but swallowed the words. I didn't push him. I figured if Nolan had something important to tell me, he would find the right moment. What I didn't know was that the moment had already happened 2 months earlier. And it was sitting inside his phone as a recording from a kitchen he wasn't supposed to walk into. Linda Marsh had an office above a hardware store in Cortadell, about 20 minutes south of Dawson. She was a forensic accountant with 15 years of experience tracking money through estates, divorces, and small business fraud cases. I found her online during one of those late-night searches and scheduled an appointment before I could talk myself out of it. She was calm, professional, with gray hair and reading glasses resting on the edge of her nose. Her desk was covered in folders. When I told her the entire story, she didn't react emotionally. She simply listened and wrote notes. 4 months later, about 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I returned to her office. She placed a thick, bound report on the desk between us. "The signature on the will that was filed," she said calmly, "does not match." She turned a page in the report. I compared it to 17 verified documents, tax returns, bank signatures, a vehicle title from 2014. "It is not written by the same hand." "You're sure?" I asked. "I'm certain." She flipped to another section showing financial records. Earl's savings account contained about $280,000 at the time of his death. The house was valued at roughly $190,000. She tapped the page. Total estate value around $470,000. My stomach tightened. After probate closed, she continued, Gerald withdrew approximately $350,000 through several transactions. Linda had mapped every dollar carefully. $120,000 went toward paying off Gerald's personal credit card debt. $85,000 paid off a truck loan. $60,000 was transferred into an account under Denise's name. $45,000 paid a contractor for home renovations, and $40,000 was withdrawn in cash. Untraceable. I stared at the numbers. He forged the will, I said quietly. And he took $350,000. Linda nodded slowly. Do you want me to turn this into a formal report? She asked. Because once I finalize it, this becomes something serious. You won't be able to walk it back. I didn't hesitate. Do it. She closed the folder. I'll have it ready in 10 days. 10 days. That would be 3 days before Thanksgiving. $350,000. That wasn't panic or desperation. That was a plan. My grandfather sometimes talked about his sister Ruth, usually just in passing. Ruth has more sense than the rest of us combined, he would say, shaking his head like he wasn't sure if that was a pride, compliment, or a complaint. Ruth Palmer was 74 and lived alone in a small clapboard house in Americus, about 40 minutes south of Dawson. She hadn't attended a family dinner in 9 years. There had been some kind of falling out with Gerald that nobody ever explained. The family simply accepted it and moved on. I found her phone number in my grandfather's old address book. I had kept the book in a shoebox after the funeral. I called on a Thursday evening, expecting the number might not even work anymore. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Palmer, my name is Oya. I'm Earl's granddaughter. There was silence for several seconds. I thought the call had dropped. Then she spoke softly. Earl told me you'd call one day. The air left my lungs. What do you mean? I asked. Your grandpa gave me something, she said. About 3 years ago. He told me to keep it safe. Said if anything strange happened after he passed, he'd come looking. She invited me to her house that Saturday. I drove there with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingers on the steering wheel. Ruth opened the door and looked at me carefully. She didn't hug me. She just studied my face for a moment before handing me a yellowed envelope. Inside was a handwritten will. My grandfather's real handwriting. Shaky. Slanted. Completely unmistakable. 2 neighbors had signed as witnesses. The document was dated 5 years before his death. The contents were simple. Everything divided equally among his 4 grandchildren. Oya, Nolan, Travis, Megan. I looked up at Ruth. She slowly lowered herself into a chair. Gerald visited your grandpa every week during those last 3 years, she said. He kept telling Earl that you didn't want to see him anymore. Said you had moved on with your life. My chest tightened. My grandfather hadn't stopped answering my call. Gerald had stopped him 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. At exactly 10:14 p.m., Nolan's name appeared on my phone. I need to tell you something, he said. His voice was low and rushed, like someone speaking quietly in a place where he shouldn't be overheard. Okay, I said. Don't ask how I know this, he continued. But 2 months ago I stopped by the house to grab my drill set from the garage. I came through the side door. He paused. I could hear him breathing. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen. They didn't hear me come in. My grip tightened around the phone. Dad said something. Nolan continued. He said, I'm telling you exactly what the lawyer said. She can't prove anything. The will is filed. It's done. My heart started pounding, and Mom said, but what if she hires a lawyer, Avorti? I waited, and Dad said, then we get louder. We make her the villain. Nobody will believe her over us. Silence filled the line between us. Nolan, I said slowly, please tell me you recorded that. I hit record the second I heard them arguing. I have the whole thing. He had sent me the audio file while we were still talking on the phone. I played it immediately. Gerald's voice filled my apartment. Muffled, small, but impossible to mistake. Denise's voice, too. Every word exactly like Nolan described. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked. He stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because I was scared, Oilia. They're my parents, too. I didn't know what to do with it. I understood that. I really did. Fear doesn't always look like shaking hands or panic. Sometimes it looks like 2 months of silence while carrying a recording on your phone, like a grenade you don't know how to throw. Thank you, I said. That took courage. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I'm not going to Thanksgiving empty-handed. The estate attorney's name was Harlan Bates. A small office on Main Street in Albany, wood-paneled walls, a University of Georgia diploma on the wall, and a handshake that actually meant something. I laid everything on his desk. Linda Marsh's forensic report, the handwritten will from Aunt Ruth, the probate file from the courthouse, and the audio recording from Nolan. He spent about 40 minutes reading through everything. He didn't say a word until he finished. Then he looked up at me. This is fraud. Clear as daylight. Forged signature, falsified probate filing, and misappropriation of estate assets. You have standing to challenge the will and file a civil claim. If the district attorney's office takes interest, it could even become criminal. I'm not suing anyone. Not yet. I just need to be ready. He nodded slowly. Ready for what exactly? My father is planning something for Thanksgiving. I don't know exactly what, but I know him. He won't let this stay quiet. Harlan put together a packet for me. A summary of the forensic findings, a certified copy of the original will, and a printout. UT of the account transfers showing where the $350,000 went. He placed everything in a large manila envelope and sealed it carefully. If you ever need to use this, he said, it speaks for itself. I put the envelope into my bag. That evening, I called Aunt Ruth. Would you come to Thanksgiving at Marlene's house? Silence. Then she said, I haven't been to a family dinner in 9 years. I know. Another short pause. For Earl, she finally said, I'll be there. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed. The envelope was in my bag by the door. If Gerald said nothing at Thanksgiving, it would stay there, sealed and untouched. But I knew my father. Silence had never really been his style. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. This part isn't really inside the story. This is just me talking to you. Sitting in that lawyer's office holding that envelope, I almost backed out. I almost placed it back on his desk and said, forget it. Because part of me, the part that spent 32 years being Gerald Palmer's daughter, still wanted to believe there was some explanation. That maybe I misunderstood something. Maybe I had it wrong. But here's my question for you. If you had the proof in your hands, would you bring it to Thanksgiving? Or would you keep the peace and stay quiet? Let me know what you think. All right. Thanksgiving morning. Aunt Marlene's house sat on a half-acre lot on Pinewood Drive, a white ranch-style home with black shutters and an American flag hanging on the porch. The driveway was already full when I pulled up at 1:15. Trucks, sedans, and a minivan with a car seat in the back. Someone had taped paper turkeys to the front door. Inside, there were 3 long tables pushed together through the center of the living room, covered in mismatched tablecloths. 32 place settings. The smell of roasted turkey and cornbread dressing hit me before I even stepped. Ed fully through the doorway. I walked inside and the room shifted. Not loudly, not in an obvious way, but I felt it. A half-second pause in the conversation. A few heads turning. Someone near the kitchen glanced at me and then quickly looked away. Everyone here had already heard the rumors. Everyone had already chosen a side. Aunt Marlene hugged me at the door. Good to see you, honey. But her arms felt stiff, and she let go a little too quickly. Gerald sat at the head of the center table, wearing a navy blazer and a pressed shirt, dressed up more than usual for Thanksgiving. Denise sat beside him in a cream-colored sweater, hands folded together, eyes already watery. They looked like a couple posing for a church directory photo. Gerald saw me and smiled. Not warmth, satisfaction. The smile of a man who had already practiced the next 2 hours in his head. Aunt Ruth arrived 15 minutes later. She came quietly through the side door and sat at the far end of the table. Nobody greeted her. Most of the younger cousins didn't even recognize her. 9 years is a long time. Nolan sat in the middle of the table staring at his empty plate like it might give him answers to something. I placed my bag under my chair. The envelope pressed against my ankle. The turkey was carved. The prayer was said, and Gerald waited. We were 20 minutes into the meal when Gerald tapped his knife against his water glass. The room slowly fell silent. The adults first, then the teenagers, then the kids at the folding table near the window. Someone turned down the football game playing on the television in the den. Gerald stood up. He placed both hands on the table, leaned forward slightly, and looked around the room like a man about to deliver a sermon. Before we go around and say what we're thankful for, he began. I need to address something that has been weighing on this family. My pulse climbed, but I didn't move. He looked at Denise. She dabbed her eyes with a napkin right on cue. Most of you have heard the rumors, Gerald continued. I wish I didn't have to do this publicly. Believe me, Denise and I tried to handle it privately. But our daughter left us with no choice. He paused for effect. A few relatives shifted in their chairs. Uncle Danny set down his fork. After my father passed away, we discovered that a large amount of money was missing from his accounts. We looked into it. We traced it. And the evidence points to one person in this room. He turned and looked directly at me. 32 faces followed his gaze. Our daughter Oilia is a thief. His voice didn't shake at all. And we have proof. The room held its breath. Aunt Marlene's hand moved to her mouth. Cousin Megan stared at me wide-eyed. A great aunt I barely knew whispered something to the woman beside her. Oh my God. Denise's crying grew louder, perfectly timed, perfectly pitched. Gerald stood over me like a judge about to announce a sentence, and the entire room waited for me to fall apart. But I didn't. I folded my hands calmly on the table and looked him straight in the eye. Gerald reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a white envelope. Crisp and official-looking. He walked slowly around the table past Uncle Danny, past Cousin Travis, past Aunt Marlene, until he stopped right beside my chair. He placed the envelope in front of me. This is a court summons, he said loudly, so every person in the room could hear. We are suing you for the return of our father's money. I picked it up. The room was so quiet I could hear the kids whispering at the folding table. I opened the flap and pulled out the document inside. At first glance, it looked real. A header with the county court's name, a date, a defendant line with my full legal name, and a SIG, nature at the bottom from someone I had never heard of. But I had spent 4 months sitting across from a lawyer. I knew what a real summons looked like. This one had no case number, no clerk's stamp. The font was wrong, too clean and too uniform. It was printed on regular copy paper, not filed court stock. It was fake. Gerald had someone create this to scare me in front of 32 witnesses. I looked at the document for a moment and then placed it gently next to my plate. Uncle Danny leaned forward. Gerald, if you need legal support, I know a good attorney. A cousin's wife was already shaking her head. Aunt Marlene looked like she might cry. Denise was still crying. Real tears now mixed with the performance ones. Impossible to separate. Gerald crossed his arms and waited. He expected me to deny everything, to cry, to beg, or to storm out of the room. That was the script. That was the version of me he had sold to everyone sitting here. I looked up at him. Are you done? I stood up slowly. No rush at all. I smoothed the napkin beside my plate like I was finishing a meal at a restaurant. Every person in the room was watching. The football game was muted now. Even the kids at the folding table had gone quiet. I want everyone here to remember something, I said. My voice stayed steady. I wasn't performing anymore. I was past that point. I didn't start this. Dad did. I turned to face Gerald directly. So I'm going to ask you one question, Dad, in front of everyone. And I want a clear answer. Gerald lifted his chin, still defiant, still believing he was in control. Did Grandpa Earl write that will? Of course he did. You're sure? His eyes narrowed slightly. Are you calling me a liar in front of my entire family? I didn't answer that question. I simply let it hang in the air like smoke. Then I bent down and reached under my chair. My fingers found the bag. Gee. Inside it was the manila envelope, heavy and sealed, 4 months in the making. I placed it on the table right next to his fake summons. The room didn't move. Gerald stared at the envelope. It was thick. It looked official. And for the first time all night, something shifted behind his eyes. A quick flicker, like a candle catching a sudden draft. I looked directly at him. Funny? I said softly. So do I? Nobody spoke. Gerald's smile disappeared. Not slowly, but all at once, like someone had reached inside his face and pulled it away. I opened the envelope. Denise stopped crying, and 32 people leaned forward.